Hi, this is Roger. Thanks for dropping by. I need to have a clear up out here. I got sidetracked yesterday into repotting, and I've done a lot of repotting videos yesterday afternoon, Sunday. They're not all going to get posted at once. They will be posted in gaps as the days go on, and obviously as I deal with more of the big box full of new orchids, there'll be more repotting and mounting videos as I go along, but I'll store them up so that they sort of don't all come at once, you know. But because I started doing that yesterday while I was in the mood, I didn't even clear up out here. My Vandas didn't get hung up. This large circulating fan is on a temporary basis at the moment, because once it becomes permanent out here, I need to shuffle things around and move tables and all things like that. I'm not at that time of year yet. So when we get a sunny day, I will get that shade netting up on the end very soon now, but I don't want to do it while we've still got a sequence of dull days, because it's only really too bright, well, and too warm, when the sun's on that end, and this time of year that may not happen often, so I don't want to shut that good light out too soon on a permanent basis, but I will have to soon. But yeah, so you know, temporarily when we get sun coming in through that glass, I set up that really large circulating fan quite close to the plants and give them a blast, and the moving air helps keep the leaves cooler. The sun isn't too bright to start having sunburn on plants yet, but it will be soon. So I will have to start putting that layer of shade netting up on a permanent basis. And quite honestly, once I get to that time of year, the light is much better, much more realistic for the plants I've got in here, even with the shade netting. And then in the not too distant future, the shade netting I'll have to go up on the roof too, because although that looks a bit shaded with the bubble wrap and the opaque polycarbonate roofing, when the sun starts getting high in the sky, it beats down on that roof and it's just too much. So I even put shade netting up there at that time of year. And yeah, so what I thought I'd do, once I've cleared up and got myself sorted out here, got my brain in gear, more coffee, this video is going to be about the dendrobiums that were rested in the winter and where they are now. Obviously they're no longer resting, the rest is over, they're back in the watering and feeding program, but we'll have a look at the progress, you know, given the time of year and everything. And I've just noticed out of the corner of my eye there's a couple of blooms opened as well, so I'll pick those off as I go past them. There's not much watering to do today, if any. If it's going to be a dull day today, I'll probably miss most of the mounts off, because they all had a flipping good soak yesterday and a feed and everything. So today, some of them, like the Telumnias, that will have dried out totally during yesterday afternoon when it was very warm in here, will need watering. But some of them won't. They can stay dry for today. So it's a decision on each individual plant. And yeah, so let's have a go at the dendrobiums that were rested, and I'll include those that should have been that didn't, one in particular. And we'll have a look at those today. All right, that's better. Got some of the unicorn juice. Right, first of all, resting dendrobiums. Most are going to be species or primary crosses of similar species. That type of environment. Most of the more complex hybrids can be treated differently, and you may get away with less of a winter rest. But all this winter rest is, in its simplest terms, is trying to emulate where they would grow. And where they would grow is deciduous forests. So in the winter, they've got no leaf cover. And in the winter, it's quite a bit cooler. And in a lot of cases, they've got exceptionally good light. So that's all this rest is about, is trying to cool them down, give them as much light as possible, yeah? And also, the main rainy season has finished. So the rains have reduced right down to next to nothing, yeah? So the emulation that we are trying to do is the brightest light possible, And in my case, in this grow room, the shade netting's off in the winter, and when the sun decides to make an appearance, they are in full direct sun through the glass. That's as bright as I can achieve. And obviously I'm in control of what water they get, so I reduce the feeding down in the autumn, slowly reduce the watering down to next to nothing, but I don't stop watering altogether. Yeah, so that's the bright light. And I allow the temperatures to drop down out here in the winter. Now, some of my orchids are not too keen on that, like the cattleyas, but they put up with it. If I didn't do it, I probably wouldn't get blooms on the resting dendrobiums. It's a compromise. It's as simple as that. But quite honestly, these resting type dendrobium species are not that easy to grow and bloom well in the home. Most homes don't get cold enough. And as soon as you go into a home environment, the light level is probably less than they could do with. If you think about it, this previous winter has been quite successful. The winter before was a miserable failure. I took all the resting dendrobiums up into the spare bedroom, the coolest room in the house. There's no heating in there. But you have to bear in mind there's a room either side and a room below. And heat can travel through walls and up through floors and down through ceilings. So it wasn't that cool. And although they were right in the window, it's still not as bright as it is in here. And because of the really low humidity in that room, I actually lost some of them. They died. It wasn't right. So this year they stayed in the grow room, and it's been much, much more successful. We'll have a look at the success or not. Right, this is Dendrobium loddigesii. Now this was a new plant last year, so this is the first winter it's spent with me. And it has growths coming out on all the canes, but now they've advanced enough for me to see and tell pretty emphatically that some of these are buds, but not all of them, and we can see the difference. If you look at those two little growths on the end of this cane, they are quite fat at the base and pointed, and they're growing some little roots. Those are going to be plants. But if you just go back up the cane a bit, the preceding growths are not fat at the base and pointed, they're going to be buds. And I can now apply that to the rest of the plant. So these look like they're going to be buds. Confident. This one might not be at the end, that could be a new plant. So this one is going to bloom, I'm reasonably confident, but it's also going to grow quite a few new plants. That is its nature. This tends to grow flat on sort of mossy mounds and things like that. So often the canes are lying against, you know, their growing conditions. And they produce plants all over the canes and produce like a dome, a mat of lots of growth. Some of the canes stick upright and stay away from the media, but I've got true new growths pushing on in quite a few places. It's in active growth now. And it looks like it's going to bloom in quite a few places, so that'll be a first time bloomer. And quite honestly, I wasn't expecting it. You know, I got that plant in the middle of last year, so I don't know whether it was seasoned or whether it had recently been imported. I had no history, so all I could do was the best I could do. And I gave it the appropriate rest. It was a strong and healthy plant when it went into the winter, so it was capable of taking that treatment. You got a weak, wishy-washy plant going into autumn, quite honestly, you're better off not attempting to rest it. Just keep it growing. Get a good, strong plant first so that it can take that sort of treatment. Yeah? But anyway, I'm confident that one is going to bloom on several of the canes, and there will be some new growths as well. So combination of the two. So I'd class that one as a successful rest. Number one. Now this one is a primary cross. It's a cross between jenkinsii and aggregatum. They are similar plants. Aggregatum tends to grow a little larger than jenkinsii, but they still have the same growth pattern. They still have this squash grape look or squash prune look. But this one was a new plant in the middle of last year. It was well strong enough to be rested, so I did. And at the moment there are no signs of new growths and there are no signs of buds. So this one may have been far enough out of its season, due to the way it had been handled before I got it, that it's going to take another year to get back into season and actually grow on well this year, fingers crossed, push out loads of new growths and settle itself down so that when it's rested next year it will perform. Now it still may produce some buds, but at the moment there's no signs on that one, so that's -1. Now this one is jenkinsii. I've had this one quite a while, and last late winter, early spring, it did actually produce a couple of blooms. This is quite a mature plant. You can see the older parts of the plant are dying right back, but the new growths have extended out in all directions, and this one does have buds. They are small, but if you look, see if I can get it in the centre of the shot. There's a little spike there with 3 buds on. There's another one down there, just below that dead pseudo bulb. There's another little spike coming out there. So I have some buds on this one. It's still not at the moment looking like a mass blooming, but it's still got time to produce more buds. They've started, that's the main thing. So it is going to have some buds. And strangely enough, the buds are not coming out of the strongest, latest growths. In other words, last year's growths. They're coming out of the previous year's growths. And that is probably the way it works. Yeah, so a +1. We will have some buds on that. And boy, are they attractive. Not huge and don't last a huge amount of time. But I would grow this plant even if it didn't bloom. I just find it interesting. Just its growth pattern and its shape and everything. And last year it put on a hell of a lot of new growth. Well, in theory, that's next year's blooms. If it's going to stick to the pattern it seems to be adopting. All these big, fat, larger growths hanging out the bottom and out the top. In theory, that's next year's blooms. But anyway, that one's going to bloom. Now this strange looking thing is Dendrobium findlayanum, and this has never bloomed for me despite it, well, it appeared to be blooming size, but it didn't bloom. It was rested the previous winter, produced a couple of little nubbins that turned into kikis, which I believe went off to somebody else, so new plants for somebody else. I'm not knocking it, but this year it is going to bloom. We have buds here, here, here. I think there's some more lurking around. And it's even got nubbins on the previous year's canes. Now those could be buds, but that's a wait and see. But these are definitely buds, and that'll be a first time bloomer. Those are attractive. Again, not long lasting, but I'd have that plant if it didn't bloom, because it's just weird. The shape of it, the way the pseudobulbs swell up at each node instead of like halfway up the cane or just at the top. So it's an interesting plant anyway, but it's going to bloom. So we will have findlayanum blooms down the line a bit. +1. Now this one's behaving a bit strangely, but nonetheless its behaviour is appreciated. It produced this one bud, which is just starting to open on one of the older canes, which is where the bud should come from. But now it's pushing out what could be buds on one of the newer canes. Not sure if there's any on that one yet. But the fact that these are behind this one, this may have a phased blooming and could still produce some more buds. We will have to wait and see. But that one's going to be open soon. I'll film it when it's properly open. But the rest has worked on this one. So this is a +1. And it's coming back into active growth. So we're getting some new growths going now. So the rest worked on this one. We will have some blooms. I mean, if these turn into kikis, then we'll have a bloom, singular, but at least I've got one. And it wasn't a hugely strong plant when it went into its rest, but strong enough to obviously perform. Yeah, that's actually something growing there on that node, so there are going to be some on that cane as well as this one. And hopefully they'll all be buds. It looks like they are. That one will be open soon, so I'm quite pleased with that. Primulinum. Has that one ever bloomed for me? I can't remember. I think it may have had a bloom when I first got it. But that would have been somebody else's care rather than mine. But it certainly didn't bloom last spring. So I think in my mind I'm thinking of this as a non-bloomer that's now giving it a go. So a +1. Now Mr. Fuzzy here, Dendrobium senile, is a conundrum, because this comes into the category of needing a proper winter rest. Well, it didn't get one, but it's still got buds. And the only reason I can think of is that it was bought in the middle of last year and it was out of season, so it hadn't had a succession of rests at the appropriate time. Because in theory, during the autumn and through the winter, most of the leaves should have dropped. And this should be quite a lot of bare canes now, looking like a load of tarantula legs. But it didn't. And because it was growing, and I didn't consider it strong enough to rest properly, this got water through the winter. So yes, it got the bright light, yes, it got the cool temperatures, but it didn't get dried off. And yet it's going to bloom anyway. It's got some buds, much to my surprise. The old plant I lost during the winter rest, the previous winter. It just keeled over. It couldn't take it. It stressed it too much and it died. So, as I say, you need to take a bit of care. But those sort of bare canes like that, that's the normal place where it should bloom. And the progression under normal circumstances would be that most of these canes would be bare now. But the canes were grown on through the latter part of New Year and was still growing when I got into late autumn. So I didn't rest it. I carried on with some water. I did reduce it down. Everything gets its water reduced out here. And on that subject, you have to stop and think where you grow your orchids, because the sort of winter rest that I'm doing out here in a dedicated grow room may well not work on your windowsill in your lounge. Firstly, it's going to be too warm. And secondly, your humidity will be quite a bit lower unless it's artificially raised, which some people do. They create a microclimate around their orchids with misters and things. But those environments are not the same. Yeah? So just because this is how it works for me might kill your plants in your environment. So you've got to think about your own environment. And some environments will not be suitable for these type of orchids. You might get away with it, but it won't be possibly as effective as my grow room is, because my humidity doesn't drop down. It's in the air. So the plants can take in some moisture from the air. My humidity out here rarely drops below 60% in the winter, and that's at sort of 13, 14 degrees with the best light I can possibly give them. And it works in here. Yeah, so it goes back to the age-old question, not how do you grow your orchids, but where do you grow your orchids, which can be as important and sometimes more so. So take care and understand your own environment before you just apply a set of rules that's worked for somebody that may not work for you. You've got to consider your own environment and don't get sort of sidetracked to just believing that this is what you've got to do for these type of orchids, because it will vary depending on where you grow them and the environment they're living in. But anyway, Mr. Fuzzy looks like it's going to have a couple of blooms. Unexpected. So I'll class that as a +1 question mark. Now we're getting to some of the ones that I cannot get in shot. Basically that cane is over 1 metre long, and it pushed one vertical at the same time. Now this is another one that I nearly killed in the previous winter. I nearly lost this plant. It desiccated badly and it did nothing for quite a while. Just had that one cane, yeah, and old canes, and then about halfway through the year it finally produced a new growth. And it didn't stop growing through the winter. It was just wrong because it was trying to get back to life. You can see this cane is still in active growth, and quite honestly, so is this one. This didn't stop growing during this winter. So did I dry it right off completely? No. So this hasn't had a proper rest. This is Dendrobium glomeratum. And this bloomed for me when I first got it, poorly. It's never done it since. I've had this a while, but I've nearly lost this plant twice, and I'm determined that's not going to happen again, which is why I didn't dry it off totally this winter, because it was in active growth. And then hopefully soon it will start some more new growths from the base, and hopefully it will do it early enough in the year that I can mature those canes ready for next winter. And obviously next winter, the two canes that are still growing will have matured during the growing season and should perform next year. But this one so far has no signs of buds and no signs of new growths. But it's got a good root system and it's actively growing, albeit slowly because it's in the winter, but it didn't stop growing. I let it go. I did a halfway house with this one. I've kept it alive, and it now looks a lot more healthy than it's ever done before. So I'm looking forward to next winter, when I've hopefully got quite a few more new growths and some truly mature canes to take into the winter rest next year. So I'll count this as a -1 for now. But from my memory, this didn't bloom in late winter, early spring. When it did bloom, a long, long time ago, it was actually more like end of April, something like that. So it still may produce some buds, but it's a wait and see. But it's alive and it's growing, which is something it hasn't been doing very well for quite a long time. So I class it as a success, but not necessarily a bloomer for this spring. Now, I've got an idea for some of the bigger ones. Let's hang them up a bit higher so that I'm not down on my hands and knees actually filming them. Now, this is Dendrobium hercoglossum. I've had this quite a long time now. It performs incredibly well year in, year out. And although it gets my normal winter rest for my orchids, in other words, it's not growing as much in the winter, so I do reduce the watering down, and it still gets an odd little bit of feed, because this one grows weird. It never stops growing. It's got like a 3-year cycle. It produces new canes and pushes them on through the growing season. Now these canes up here at the top, that one's got some bugs on it. Oh, I'll get at them in a minute. These canes up here near the top are last season's growths, but they haven't finished. They're still growing, and they will grow all through this season as well, including some new ones that will start from the base and replace these as these get longer and hang down. And then eventually, usually during the cane's 3rd year, it starts to drop its leaves, and there are some bare canes. But during that time, those canes will probably have bloomed on every available node, so they become redundant effectively. But this one is just starting its buds. This one I don't need to worry about. It just blooms. Yeah. So there's buds coming out in places, in many places actually. So yeah, this one's going to do it again. This produced such a good show last year. It got a 1st and a 2nd at the 2 different orchid societies, and it will probably do it again this year, providing it does it at the right time and matches up with one of our meetings. But yeah, part of the marks with the judging are the progression of the plant, and with this plant it's blatantly obvious that it's progressing well, because you can differentiate the new canes because they're up near the top of the plant. Yeah, so we've got this one that's getting heavy enough to become pendulous, and then we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 other new canes that were produced last year, and it will start if it hasn't done already. No, it hasn't. It will start producing more new canes soon as the buds progress. So this one doesn't get a formal winter rest, but it does. I do slow it down in the winter simply because the short days, lower temperatures, it's not going to be growing as vigorously. So that's the only reason I slow down the watering, is because the plant wouldn't use it. Not because I'm trying to rest it. I don't rest this one, not properly anyway, but you can see there's buds forming all over the place here, literally, all over the place. And then halfway through the season, once I can see where the new growths are and it's finished blooming, I will look for those redundant canes because the plant's getting cluttered. Yeah, so by leaving those redundant canes that have finished blooming, they're not going to bloom anymore, they've lost all their leaves, I can thin it out a bit. But yeah, this one always does well for me. It's a good plant, that one, very good. Now this one is my Dendrobium Nestor. This one was bought at the RHS show in bloom. I saw the blooms and thought, I'm having that. And I think I pushed somebody out of the way to take it down out the rack. Somebody that was stood there looking at it. I was thinking of buying it. I think they were thinking of buying it, but I just walked to the front, picked it up, took it down and thought, right, it's in my hands now, it belongs to me. At the time, I considered it quite an expensive orchid. £25. But now, on reflection, that was a good price for a plant like this. Anyway, during the that growing season, it grew this cane, the longest one it's got, and maybe the longest one it'll ever have. But it only produced one. It bloomed over the entire length of that, and that one also got, I think that got a first or a second at the Orchid Society. But then, last growing season, it grew 3 canes. Now, they're not as big, but do I care? Do I care if they're quite as big? No, I don't. That's going to bloom over virtually the entire length of all 3 canes. That is going to be quite a show. And we're looking at 3 blooms in some places, 2 in others. So there's going to be a lot of blooms on that. And it's coming back into life, starting its new growth. That is perfectly in season now. It's going to behave itself forevermore. So that one's now simple for me. I don't have to think about it. It's set in its ways, and I'm set in my ways as to how I will look after that, and it performs. So this one's well off the worry list. It's just going to do that now. And even if it only produces those 2 new growths this year, it's still 2 new canes that will do this again through the winter and into next spring. I'm hoping for more new growths. This plant should get bigger and stronger as it progresses. But this one's your typical deciduous one. Goes into the winter with all its leaves on its latest growths. And then through the winter it gradually dumps them. Now occasionally it dumps quite a lot all at once. And if you didn't know any better, boy would that be worrying when all your nice shiny green leaves suddenly start turning yellow and end up on the floor in the morning. Well, that's what it's supposed to do. So once you know that, you don't worry anymore. But what you do need to watch is the canes, yeah? Because if all your leaves are turning yellow and falling on the floor, and these are starting to desiccate and suck in, you know, like that, then there's something wrong. And the bit that will be wrong is probably that up there, because without a good root system, they can't hydrate. So this one's doing well. No worries for this one. That's going to be a +2, I think, not a +1. I'm in the lounge now trying to get this whole plant in one shot, and I still don't think I've got it all in. It's a biggie. Now, I got this plant at the beginning of last year. It was obviously an import. I won't go into the naughtiness, but quite honestly, this plant looked as though it had just been yanked off a tree, and it had all its roots chopped off, about 2 inches long. There were a lot of them, but they'd just been chopped off unceremoniously, and that's what I got. And I didn't expect too much out of it for its first year. Now this is what I mean by useless canes. It's totally desiccated, it's dead. It's had it, it's long since gone. So those are coming off soon, those 3, yeah? It's obvious when you look at them. that they've had it. So they serve no purpose, apart from making the blinking plant look untidy. But what I managed to do, bearing in mind the plant was not only unceremoniously stripped probably from the wild, naughty, maybe not, I may be dissing somebody unnecessarily, but it's what it looked like to me. But I grew this cane, and this new growth started at the beginning of the growing season last year, so it's grown a good length, almost as long as the longest cane from before. And I thought it may or may not bloom. Well, yes, it's going to bloom. So we will have Dendrobium anosmum blooms for the first time. But then partway through the season, it decided to push out another growth, and that one didn't mature. It didn't get a long enough growing season. Simple as that. So it's easily explained. And then it decided to try again back here, unsuccessfully. I don't think that's going to come to anything at all. The plant itself is coming back into life. There's its first new growth. Come on, I want more than one. This is one of my favourite blooms, this is. And I was pleased that it was going to bloom. This also looks like it's going to manage to push some blooms out on one of the older canes that were on the plant when I got it. And if it can bloom on that one, it may even manage to push some buds on that one. We shall see. But blooms on this one, yes, and some blooms on that older cane. So that's a +1. And this year, this plant will get itself back into its regular seasons again from the new growth it produces this year. And who knows, this cane may bloom next late winter, early spring. It won't be much of a blooming, it's a short cane. But that's still photosynthesizing and providing some energy for the plant, albeit a short cane. And it didn't drop its leaves in the winter. It's because it started growing about June. It didn't get a full growing season, so it's wrong. But hopefully that will correct itself and the new growths will be in season, and then we should get the similar sort of thing to this on the latest growth next year. And who knows, this cane, which seems to be blooming from about halfway down to the bottom, might push some buds out farther back next season. You never know. So that's definitely a +1. And a little unexpected, because I just knew this plant was sort of wrong when I got it, and it had to settle down. Well, hopefully it's done that now, so the next rest will produce the blooms in the proper places, and this year's growths will push on to a decent size, because they're starting early in the year. So yeah, well, that's a definite +1. Now this is Dendrobium friedericksianum, and I'm holding off my decision on this one at the moment. This did bloom last year, but it bloomed late. Nothing like late winter, early spring. It bloomed later in the year. Well, if it's going to repeat that this year, I wouldn't expect to see buds yet. Well, that's exactly what's happening. There are no buds on this one. But if it's going to bloom later in the year, then there's plenty of time. And I see no reason why it shouldn't. If it bloomed last year, I see no reason why it shouldn't this year. But a little sidetrack. You look at the plant, yeah, and you've got leaves, yeah? You've got leaves, and they all look similar. And then you see one like that, and you think, well, why is that leaf wrong? And inside of there was a whole bunch of mealybugs. You can see all the sticky residue they've left behind. And their bite marks are going to gradually turn into pale spots and patches. Yeah? Now, I hadn't noticed them, fair enough. As I said, I am getting a few mealybugs around at the moment. Luckily, most of the scale have gone. I don't think I'll get any more outbreaks of scale. Quite honestly, when I see scale, they get hit there and then. No messing. But yeah, that one leaf had a little, I wouldn't say it was an infestation. You can't really call one leaf an infestation. But they've made the leaf curl. They've spoilt that leaf. And best thing to do with that, quite honestly, now, right now, is cut it off and discard it. Because although I've rubbed them all off with my finger, there's no guarantee I got eggs and things like that, and I'm avoiding touching the rest of the plant in case any are stuck to my thumb. But anyway, this one I think doesn't bloom this time of year. It's as simple as that. So it's had its rest. It grew well last year, put on loads of new growth. But it did get disturbed. I had to remount it because the roots were starting to fail. And I think it was the piece of wood it was on it didn't like, and the moss had broken down. So obviously you start to get more acidity in the root base if your moss goes. So I had to unmount it and remount it. And this time when it was mounted, the moss is on top. Yeah, so if the new set of roots this year really get hold of that mount and the moss breaks down, I can just tease it off the top and put some new stuff on. So that's the new way that I like to mount, is moss on the top, roots on the bark. But anyway, it's growing well. But I can't say whether that's a +1 or a -1 because it's not its time yet. And I know that because I've had it long enough. So we'll wait and see with that one. But with the amount of new growth it grew, I see no reason why it shouldn't bloom. So that's that one. And this is the forerunner of what's to come. Yeah, so there's always one who likes to get up the front of the queue, push in. And boy am I pleased it's done that. That was a Kiki from Alberto in Italy, and I expected nothing from this, absolutely nothing. So whatever I got was a bonus. I filmed these a couple of days ago as the buds were just starting to crack, but most of them are opening now, so you see what I mean about the fading effect. What is a virtually green colour of the lip, once the light gets on them and they've been open a couple of days, it fades to a more creamy green. But the combination of those colours is just gorgeous. And it's also its shape. You know, if you look at the shape of that lip, that is actually unusual. It's like a tunnel that opens out and curves upwards. Lovely little platform for the pollinators to land on. Land here, crawl up there, do your business, and then go and find another flower and do your business. But I'm well pleased with that. That's Dendrobium aphyllum. Expected nothing and got that. Well, you can't be sad about that, can you? And this one does have a strange blooming habit. I mean, this isn't my new growth. Obviously this was the Kiki that I got later last year, so I wasn't expecting much from it. But what I am expecting now is some new canes to start soon. Yeah, and it has a habit of blooming in the middle of the canes. It very rarely gets blooms right down to the tip, and it very rarely has blooms near the base of the cane. It just seems to push the blooms out in the middle section. But you know, when you've got a plant with 20, 30 canes on, and it does that en masse, boy is that a spectacle. The mother plant that this came from, that Alberto's got, did that last spring. There would be a video, if you want to search it out, of that plant. Quite honestly, you could tell by his voice it was his pride and joy. And it performed really well last year. I'm hoping it's going to do it again, and we'll see a video soon, I would think. But anyway, it's bloomed. Now it needs to push some new growths and become a nice, bigger, stronger plant. Because at the moment, that genuinely is a single Kiki, albeit a long one. It's still a Kiki. And it's done well. That's a +2, isn't it? Expected nothing and got blooms. Yeah, great. So that's the resting types in the main. I did get a box full of new plants, and as I go through those, I've got to work out, are any of those true resters or semi-resters or continuous growers? Because there were quite a few dendrobiums in amongst them. But anyway, those are the ones that I class as resting types, or get a near as damn it rest. I'll call it a semi-rest. And I know that some of the new plants are going to have some in amongst those categories. So once I get them all sorted out, as far as I'm concerned, if I've got a dendrobium, most of them look pretty good mounted, number one. And number two, they are a hell of a lot easier to rest on a mount, because they've got so little media around the roots. You can see how dry they are and how long they've been dry. You know, if you've got a dendrobium in a dark pot that you can't see through, you don't even know if it's dried out yet. So for me, the resting type Dendrobiums are much easier to handle mounted, where I can see what's going on. I can see most of the roots. Yeah, so that's how I like to grow them. The downside, or whatever you want to call it, is that during that growing season they're going to need watering every day, and if you haven't got a lifestyle that lends itself to allow you to do that, then yet again they might not be the best types of plants for you to choose. But with me being retired, I'm prepared to put the workload in. They are my favourite genus, infinitely variable, from delicate little beauties like this to something a bit more shouting loud like that. Now that's a nobly. If you read your books and all stuff like that, that should have a formal winter rest. Well, it doesn't get it. And it stops it blooming, as you can see. It doesn't get a winter rest, so it doesn't bloom very well, does it? Yes, I am being sarcastic. There are some where there's misinformation around, and these more complex nobly hybrids do not need a strict winter rest. They just need to be a cooler, brighter if you can, and reduce your watering. But if you stop your watering, you might actually start desiccating your canes so bad that they've lost their strength to be able to bloom. So go steady with the complex nobly hybrids. They don't really need to be dried right off and shrivel up in the winter. You'll still get your blooms anyway, as you can see. As you can see. And even on the kikis, as you can see. Yeah? So don't go mad with your nobly hybrids. They don't need it. Now, if by any remote chance you've managed to get hold of Dendrobium nobile the species, well, if you don't treat that properly, you won't get any blooms. That is a stubborn thing, but it's very difficult to get hold of. I doubt if there's probably hardly anybody that's got the true species Dendrobium nobile. There can be only one, like Highlander. Most of them are the hybrids, and a hell of a lot of them are Yamamoto bred hybrids. They've got vigour, they've got strength, and they've lost the need for that formal rest, and they will do pretty well without it. So these nobly hybrids are okay in your home. They'll do fine. They've become tolerant, like our hybrid Phalaenopsis. They're tolerant, so they're more easygoing and easier to handle. Got nobly blooms getting muddled up with Cymbidiums here. I'm running out of room, well, for obvious reasons at the moment. I really do have to have a good sort out. Anyway, that's just to go over the Dendrobiums. I'll add on the end a persistent non-bloomer that's finally decided to do its business. Victoria Reginae is about to bloom for the first time ever, and it's producing kikis at the same time. And I thought that was a kiki, and then it turned into bloom, so that'll be a first time bloomer. Not a resting type really. The only reason that gets its watering reduced in the winter is purely because it's colder out here and it's not actively growing anymore. But that doesn't get a formal rest, that type. I've just added it on the end because I'm so pleased it's going to bloom at last. Right, see you next time. Yeah, as I say, these resting type Dendrobiums are not for everybody. Some consider them so much work that they're not worth the effort. But I like them. I am prepared to work the effort. And quite honestly, the effort in the winter is next to nothing. They hardly ever get watered. They do get a bit now and again. They get the bright light naturally because all the shade netting's off. That's the best I can do. And all I do to control it is my thermostat for my heater is set at the lowest temperature I want. And most of the UK winter, the heater will kick on and just keep it ticking over at 13 to 14 degrees. Now during the main resting period I actually reduced that by 1 degree this year. I actually let it get down to 12, 13. So say some of the plants weren't too happy with that, but they've lived with it. And who knows, next year we may have more resting Dendrobiums. This bush down here, come on, the name's not going to come, is it? I'm going to have to get the flipping tag out. That's not like me with a Dendrobium. Hancockii. We do have some buds, I mean, that is definitely one. And there are some others. So we are going to get some blooms on that big bush. And the other big bush, hang on, hercoglossum's in the way. I'm running out of places to put things. This other big bush here, which is one of the new ones that came out of the box full. Some of the older canes are definitely starting to swell on the node, so I'm pretty sure that's going to produce some blooms. So we should get some blooms on that. And well, again, that's a new plant for me, so I haven't even looked up how to look after it yet. But it's coming into its growing season. That's all I'm interested in this year. But quite a lot of these older canes have got swellings at the appropriate places. So I think we're going to get some blooms on that one. That'd be good. At least I'll see what they're like and how long they last and whether they've got fragrance. That's all you can do. So that's the Dendrobiums for now. There's quite a lot of other Dendrobiums lurking around, but that's the ones that I've picked on today. And see you next time.